Tell me a little bit more about your journey. I know that the last time we met was in Silicon Valley,
Yeah,
and that was in 2014 or 13.
I think
Uh,
it's probably 14. It's 14 because we were at 500, I think, at the time, right? I was
that's correct.
running
You were a
I was running
multi-million
the SF
500.
office. Yeah, I was running the SF office at that time. And so let's see, I spent 6 years at 500 startups as a partner. So I ran the SF office, ran the core accelerator program, was basically doing investments out of Fund 3 and Fund 4. And then I left actually end of 2019, beginning of 2020, and then been kind of figuring out my journey since then. So the plan was to sort of do the conference circuit and the music festival circuit in 2020, and then COVID got in the way, and yeah, 2020 was a mess. But I ended up joining and running a gaming holding company. So I had two very good friends of mine who one guy is German Kazakh and one guy was Ukrainian, and they were running a very, very large, sort of conglomerate of gaming companies, and we were going to take that thing public. So I was there basically for about 2 years running that company, helping them run that company.
That was from 2020 to 2022. And what kind of a gaming company was it?
Yeah, so video games. So we had about 18 companies, 600 people based in Ukraine and Kiev, and like about 60 people based in Germany. And we had about 18 companies all in the gaming space. So we had different gaming studios, a bunch of gaming SaaS plays, a bunch of IP, like infrastructure plays. So yeah, it was really fun. So that was a cool thing I did. And was doing angel investing and a lot of I got sort of like I ended up joining a bunch of investment committees of different VC funds around the world. So was still doing the investment stuff on the side while running this company, helping them run this company. So yeah, that's basically what I did. As you know, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine last year, that kind of got in the way of the company. So that caused a lot of disruption. So I basically left the company last year in September. And so, I kind of do a bunch of stuff right now. So I kind of call myself a portfolio entrepreneur, right? So I do sort of like have my, an angel fund, a small VC fund. I do my IC work. I do some consulting. So for example, I've done some consulting work for some various like large companies to help them figure out their venture sort of like fund strategies. And I just do a lot of mentoring and take care of my fairly large portfolio now. So yeah, kind of have some operating stuff, some investment stuff, and some consulting stuff, and kind of just keep myself busy.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I didn't have a chance to be able to understand what all you were up to, but that seems like a very much a millennial thing to do.
Which
Lots
is
of
ironic as a
different
Gen X guy,
things.
right?
Say that
I mean,
again?
I'm a Generation X guy, and so it's funny to sort of like hear, sort of like, but I do think that's sort of the future, right? Of just like having, even if you have a full-time job, you should probably do stuff on the side, right? Whether it's a side business, side consulting, side projects. I just think it just makes sense in this world, right? It keeps your perspective. You have new perspectives all the time, keeps you busy, which I think in a good way. And hopefully you're working on stuff that you like. Like I like what I do, right? And I also allow myself a lot of time to do sort of a lot of like, volunteer mentoring, go to food bank, like just, lots of time to read and keep up with stuff. So I think this is sort of what keeps you sort of like relevant, and also just sort of helps you understand what's happening in this world now, right? It's changing so quickly.
That actually is the correct segue into our topic for today, right?
Yeah.
And what I wanted to understand was I'm getting a lot of people reaching out to me, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Twitter, which are the two primary platforms I tend to spend a lot of time on.
Yep.
And this whole notion of side hustle, side project, side business is
Yep.
becoming a lot more important, especially post COVID. I think for three primary reasons, right? Number one, people are working from home somewhat,
Yep.
not 100%, but at least a lot more. And so they have a little bit more time. Number two, the tech layoffs seem to have changed the psyche, especially. I think people kind of expected this kind of work from this kind of layoff stuff from other companies, but Google and maybe to a certain extent Meta being so, or Facebook being so
Established.
cut and dry about it
Yeah.
has set a lot of people in their minds going, oh, okay, I need to take care of myself, committing to a Facebook or a Google for life. And I've heard people that have been there for 21 years just got cut unceremoniously. And then the third thing is just the ability to see the changes that AI is bringing is going to remove a lot of people's jobs is the fear. There's a visceral fear in a lot of people's minds. So you've been doing this for a while. You've been doing full time and you've been doing some side gigs and side
Yeah.
hustles.
Yeah.
How did you get started, or how do you build yourself a niche? How do you go finding the niche that you can actually do a side hustle? And let's start with that.
Yeah, I mean the side hustle, it has to, it has to sit in. So here's my view. Like, and I told my, when I had people working for me at 500, I told them like, you can work on whatever side hustle as long as like you can work on anything as long as it's not, competitive to 500, and it's not, as long as it's not competitive to the portfolio companies, you do whatever you want as long as you do your main job, right? So that was sort of always my attitude, and I'm of the view where it's just I actually think that's very good for employees. You're developing new skills. So I think as you develop your side hustle, it has to be something you're interested in. Like if you just do it purely just so you can make money, I'm not sure that's really the right framework, where you almost have to think about sort of a hobby turned sort of like money maker. At least that was for me, right? Most of the stuff, I'm fortunate to sort of like be in a situation where you get to pick and choose a lot of stuff that you do. And so for me, how I sort of fell into this, where it's really more about sort of freedom, right? Of just sort of freedom, and when I say freedom, it's sort of like not necessarily just financial freedom, but like freedom of just like I want to enjoy my days, right? It's just sort of you spend your time when sort of like on somebody else's agenda. Now it's sort of like my own agenda. So why shouldn't I craft this world? Like I'm still busy, but at least for the most part, like 70-80% of the time I'm working on stuff that I actually really enjoy. And so this is sort of goes back to sort of like your question. So it's long-winded answer to your question, where I think it sort of needs to stem into sort of like your own expertise of just like what are you good at? Do you have a good understanding of what you're good at? Number two, are you working on something that you're like interested in? Like don't go and do drop shipping if you literally have no interest in learning all the aspects of drop shipping, right? Which is not just identifying the product, but also the customer acquisition piece, right? The copywriting, figuring out the marketing channels. Like if you don't want to go and do that, drop shipping is going to be hell for you, right? And so I do think it's, maybe you're better off just doing consulting, where it's like you're a programmer, maybe doing side gigs on like like on one of the hundreds of platforms out there, like selling people services, right? Like there's so many of them right now, where it's like go work on these things, or maybe go build an app that you can sort of play around with, or build some side project or do some side consulting. Like start small. And so that's basically what I did. I started small.
Let me ask you a different question associated with the same topic. So, three things that I took away. What you mentioned, number one was started as a hobby or started as something that you enjoy and then
Yeah.
became more of a side gig.
Yeah.
Number two, started very small, meaning you did this for maybe an hour, you enjoyed it, and then you
Yeah.
got a little bit more interested in it.
Yeah.
The third thing was, which you didn't mention, so I'm going to lead
Yeah.
you into this question.
Yeah.
There are so many different ways to have a business model around your side hustle. Obviously, with the creator economy,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that whatever that term encompasses, because it seems like
Yeah.
a lot of different things. There are people that make money by just renting out their time. Call me, consult with me, half an
Yeah.
hour, 1 hour, and I'll give you
Yeah.
150 bucks, 250
Right.
bucks, whatever it is per hour.
Right.
People that make money on newsletters, people that make money building side projects and selling them, affiliate, et cetera, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, how important is it as a side hustle to have one primary source of business model revenue for you, as opposed to I see a lot of people, they build a bunch of books, ebooks or something like that. Then they do a bunch of courses, they sell courses online, they try and get some people to subscribe to their Twitter feed. It seems like they're all over the map. Are you more of the I'm going to focus on one thing and optimize that and everything else is marketing? Or are you more, hey, money comes from 10 places, money comes from 10 places, who knows?
Yeah, I would say, I've always been a generalist. So it's funny, which is so different than sort of like my previous sort of like, career, sort of like VC, which is like focus, 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 right? Like that's what you're supposed to do. I've always been a generalist. And so I just work on a lot of different things, and I time box it. But I also almost everything I work on, I like, where it's just like, but you have to compartmentalize and you have to time box this stuff. And so this is actually where sort of like the calendar management becomes very, very important. And I also think one of the things I'll say with the side hustles, and this is advice I give most folks, where it's like, I do think it's usually better to sort of like start with one first, right? Before you do like five or six, and do it and time box it, either run it as an experiment and go, I'm going to try it out for 6 months. So very similar to my newsletter, right? Like I'm actually not like, I don't think I'm ever going to make money from my newsletter. I'm open to it, but that wasn't the plan. The original thing with the newsletter, as an example, my hard fork sort of like newsletter, it was really more for therapy and really more for like, okay, let's just get my thoughts on paper, right? And I was going to commit to it for like 2 years. And for me, where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this 3 times a week for 2 years, and then I'm going to just see how I feel like in 2 years, right? Because like I know when you hear from creators where it's like, look, your first 3 to 4 years, like you're going to get no traction. It wasn't until probably year 3 or 4 that you sort of blow up. I have a lot of creator friends that are very successful, whether on YouTube or with podcasts, where like you just have to commit. And so for me, where it's just like, okay, if I'm not enjoying this by like year two, it's getting no traction, and I'm not enjoying this by year two, I'm going to stop. I'm going on to year 3 now, where it's like, yeah, actually, I am enjoying this, and is this going to turn into something? Not sure, but like I'm enjoying this right now. I'm getting a lot of value from it personally, from a therapy perspective, but also just people are writing like, oh, this is really helpful, or like I'm inspired by this, and so I'm like, okay, great. That's enough payment for me. Does that make sense? And so
Yeah,
I don't think everything has to be about sort of like making money. It's nice. Thankfully, sort of like knock on wood, I seem to do well from all these other things. I don't need to worry about that. But for now, like I just think you want to have a combination of like I said, you can have a main gig, you can have these side hustles, but I also think it's helpful to have hobbies, right? Because like that makes you an interesting person.
I agree with that. Let me ask you a different question just about the same topic
Yeah.
then. I see a few people that are just very, very good at doing one thing. And here's the thing that you and I have in common, right? I've been writing, blogging, if you want to call it that, which is what we
Yeah.
used to call it back in the day,
Yeah. Yeah. Back in the day.
for 21 years. Same
Yeah.
website, same
Yeah.
content. It's built over probably the 20 years, have built close to what, 2,000 posts or 2,000
Yeah.
articles
Yeah.
or whatever the case
Yeah.
might be. And then I hear, and it's gone up to about 145,000 subscribers.
Wow. I mean, that's
Over
huge.
20 years, though,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
over 20 years.
Right. Right.
And then I hear a couple of people, day before yesterday, I got an email from one of the newsletters I subscribed to. 3 months, the man is jumping into the newsletter full time, 22,000 subscribers in 3 months.
Wow.
The
That's impressive.
bandwagon was great,
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? AI is the bandwagon that has spawned maybe hundreds of newsletters, each of them with 10, 15, 20,000 subscribers.
Yeah. 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 That's amazing. I love hearing stuff like that. But you have to understand sort of like the big question comes down to sort of like it's like crypto, right? It's like being in sort of like crypto when it first kicked off. I don't know being in crypto now is good. Like it's just one of those things where you have to like this, right? And I'm really glad that that sort of like they've been able to ride that wave. But what is your question? I'm curious of your question, but
My
I
question
always love
is, there's
stories
a
like
lot,
this.
I get a lot, I get almost once or twice a day, not a day, sorry, once or twice a week. I get an email from someone young that wants to start in a new side hustle or maybe just a full-time job.
Yeah.
And they get a ton of FOMO,
Yeah.
right? They're like, oh my God, everybody is doing websites and they're doing
Yeah. Yeah.
newsletters and they're
Yeah.
doing all of these things. And I'm sitting over here in my job and that's all I do.
Yeah.
How do you avoid the FOMO? Because a lot of people do it because they see somebody being successful, as opposed to the motivation is not to do it because they enjoy it. And after some time, I think if you don't enjoy it, my suspicion is they're going
Yeah.
to give up. I don't want to
They're
advise
going to
them
flame
not to
out.
do it.
They're going to flame out, man. And this is what you find is like, have you noticed if you take a look at like many newsletters, you take a look at many podcasts, most people stop between the second to the fifth one. And so for me, where it's just like, wow, like if you don't enjoy this, it's because they don't enjoy this, or maybe they're expecting like you have to enjoy it ultimately, right? Like I hate that term, follow your passions. Like, yeah, that's garbage advice, right? But I do think it's one of those things that whatever you choose to do, you have to commit to it for a certain time. to really like, maybe you say it's 50 podcasts, right? Like, let's just say decide to go and do it. But I do think it's very natural, right? This Rene Girard, like, mimetic sort of desire, right? Like you want what everyone else has. That's sort of what happens. And so you do have to fight that, of just when you have to really understand yourself, of sort of like, what do I enjoy? And so like I really enjoy writing. Like it's actually, for me, I'll do it for the
Very
rest of
does
my
do
life,
some.
right? Yeah, right. And same thing with like I like doing angel investing. I like doing VC investing. Like I'll do that for the rest of my life. That's the only way you're going to get good at it. But it took me a long time to get there, right? Like it took me, I've been investing now for 10 years. And also it took me sort of taking a break in 2020 to go and like, hey, I kind of miss this, right? Like I'd like to, I should do this. And so I think it's really understanding yourself. Like, both you and I are gray hairs, right? We've been in tech over 20 years. I've been in tech over 23 years now. Like, and I had to do a whole bunch of different things to understand, like, oh, I'm good at this. And the only reason I'm good at this is by doing a bunch of different things. And so I do think you have to time box it. I do think you have to sort of commit to a certain time. And I think you're naturally going to get FOMO. I get that all the time where I'm like, I'm a very regular Twitter guy, but I have like 5,000 followers. But actually, what I found is that people who actually have, like, I talked to sort of like creator folks, and their best times and the most creative times where anything sub 10,000 sort of like followers, when they get very big, they just start getting the haters. So like every tweet they put out, there's like so much hate, right? Like it's just like, it just becomes this bloodbath. And then so, as I was talking to a friend of mine where it's like, yeah, I kind of miss the days of, he's like, has over 1 million followers, but he's like, yeah, I kind of sometimes miss the days of trying to be able to sort of like have a cut, sub 10,000 followers and kind of just write whatever I want, and you're not going to get the hate and stuff, right? And it's just like it's interesting. So yeah, it's funny.
I remember this small bit that Jerry Seinfeld. I'm reminded of this bit by Jerry Seinfeld, and he said, "Hey, do you like all the fame? It comes with all of these people coming in, right?" He's like, "Yeah, I like the fame because the fame that I didn't have before, it kind of sucked. It's
Yeah,
I don't like this, but I like it anyway."
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But no, I hear you to a certain extent. Now I've got about 50,000 followers on Twitter. There's not a single post that I put that I will not get somebody having a
Yeah,
different
yeah, yeah.
opinion than the one I posted.
Yeah. I mean, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, where it's, you have to take it for what it is, where it's like, yeah, I'm wondering, oh, I'm getting all this like pushback, or I'm like, what am I missing? Right. Sometimes that's helpful to sort of like frame your thinking. So this is why like it is important to sort of like have diverse friendships and diverse networks and diverse things, because you want to understand sort of like we all have blind spots, right? And we all have our egos, and we all have our how should I say it? Just sort of like pitfalls, right? Just like there's certain things we just like miss, and so I'm like, oh, I really did not think this through as much. This is where the writing is helpful for you. You put it out and you're like, oh wow, I got a lot of pushback, or like, oh wow, like, hey, actually a lot of people resonate this, or like, oh, some people are like really don't like this part, and let me understand why, right? And so that does help you frame your thinking a little bit better.
I've written a book that is hopefully going to be published next week, is what I'm going to, is I'm hoping for. It's
Yeah.
really, the editor is finishing up the tiny touches. Hopefully I'll get it out. And the book is about introduction to investing as a side hustle, investing in trading, not in private companies, in
In
public
stocks.
market stocks,
Okay.
because that's what I've been doing for a long
Yeah, yeah,
time,
yeah, yeah,
right? For many, many years. And one of the questions that I get from a lot of people going into a side hustle, investing
yeah,
in particular, but
yeah.
I'm sure that this applies to everything else, which is a lot of people's motivation to do the side hustle is to earn money.
Hmm.
And I don't know why, I seem to find a better fit for people that are starting with the intention not to earn money as a side hustle, but to give a avenue for either their creation or their hobby or their time.
Yeah,
And so I was tempted to say, hey, don't start with the intention of making money. Start with the intention of learning.
yeah, 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 yeah,
I get a lot of people going, why would I want a side hustle if I don't want to do anything other than
yeah.
make money? So how do you answer that question? Is it right to start with one intention? Is it wrong for me to say don't start with the intention of making money? What's your perspective on that?
I mean, my perspective is it's sort of in line. I'll put it another way, where it's like, you heard this term like intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic, right?
Right.
Intrinsic is like, hey, I'm doing this for myself, versus extrinsic, which is like money, fame, respect, whatever it is, right? And I just think like extrinsic so hard. It's very similar. Like you and I have both done VC investing, right? Like there's a big difference between investing in a founder, and I think this will answer the question. There's a big difference in investing in a founder that's mission driven versus investing in a founder that's money driven. I think they're two, like things get tough when you're starting a company. And so if you're extrinsically motivated, which is like, I'm gonna sell this company 2 years or 3 years from now, like they never make it because it's just as hard, right? Versus you're intrinsically motivated, which like there's this mission I want to, it's hard already, but the having that mission, the focus on the learning, the focus on your personal interest and whatnot, you're more likely to stick it out to sort of like get good at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I agree
Eh,
with you. That's why I'm tempted to not say the portion. I edited a portion and I said, listen, start with the right intent.
Yeah.
But I get a ton of people asking the question, if I don't want to start a side business to make money, why am I starting it? So, in some ways, it's like, don't you have something that you like to do for not just money? And turns out a lot of people don't.
Yeah, no,
The
which
thing
is,
to do,
but this is also I think most people are not interesting, and most people will never be successful in life, right? I actually like look, I know a lot of people supposedly successful in life who you wouldn't want to hang out with because they're just like boring, like we're just like that old joke is like this person's so poor, all they have is money, right? You've
yeah.
heard like and it's an old 20s, like I think it was Mark Twain saying or somewhere, but like just that struck me. Like I live in Silicon Valley, and I know lots of very wealthy people, and most of them are very uninteresting people because they focus all their time managing and building a business. Great. But I actually think like for me, I'm looking for the Renaissance people, right? Like, like a Medici, right? Like they were very successful bankers, but they also had lots of interest in art and other things like that. And that's, I never want to be just sort of like the boring rich dude, right? Like I want to have lots of multiple interests. And that's what I think you're absolutely right. Where just like talking to people where it's like, look, if your goal is to make money, sure, go for it, right? Like if making money, sort of like is enjoyable, that's awesome. But ultimately, you sort of like you have to look at sort of the need to focus on the process and not the outcome. You're more likely to be successful if you focus on the process because you learn to sort of get good at these things. It's about learning, right? And if you do it well over time, something will come out of it. And you
Yeah.
just have to have faith over time with effort, and over time, something will come out of it. And with this idea of, no, I'm doing this just to make money. Look, the market changes all the time. And so when you go out there, learning is the best way to sort of like optimize toward that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's switch gears into the startup world.
Yeah.
There's and investing in and raising money in particular. Seems like there's a big boom now, thanks to generative AI, thanks
Yeah.
to ChatGPT. Everybody seems to, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, you guys seem to be, in this frenzy of trying to invest in companies, start companies, all in generative AI. And while the rest of the folks are going, oh my God, my job's going to go away. Where do you fall on that line? Number one, my
Yeah.
job's going to go away. Generative AI is going to take away my job, whoever it is.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, saying, oh, we need to fund these companies because that's going to be the future.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of like I always worry when like everyone jumps into something where I'm just like, so you see two sides, right? Where it's just like I think like a lot of trends, I think it's overhyped right now for the short term. I think it's underhyped in the long run. So I think this will take out like 5 to 10 years to play out, right? But I do think if you're thinking about like if you're going to retire in 10, 10 years from now, you're probably okay. If you're planning on retiring 20, 30 years from now, like you're in big trouble, in my opinion. And so I think like I worry when there's a lot of investors jump into this because it's very similar to crypto, right? Like, or any other trend where it's just like when the minute that other founders see that there's a lot of heat there and a lot of investment there, then you see a lot of companies move in that direction. Same thing with the VCs, where it's like, oh wow, like here's a bunch of companies, that worries me. But this is one of those things, right? Innovation is a bed of weeds. It's not a flower bed, and so you need this sort of like a lot of sort of like let 1,000 flowers bloom. Like a couple of them will be left at the end of the day, but they'll be really, really important. And there's going to be a lot of these experiments that run. I think that's a good thing in the long run. But I do, if anybody who's a white collar worker should be worried. That means you need to go figure out your business. The reality is that the one thing that will not ever be replaced is entrepreneurial thinking. All right, somebody can cobble together these things to sort of to solve a real problem for a market or to solve somebody's problem. That's an entrepreneurial thing. right? And so I think like the sooner people learn some aspects of entrepreneurship or develop this mentality of entrepreneurship, right? Finding problems, solving problems, doesn't matter how you do it, right? Whether you do it through outsourcing somewhere else, whether you do it through AI, whether you do it through whatever,
No code, low
that's a
code.
yeah, no code, low code, doesn't matter. Are you solving people's problems? That's what's the critical piece.
Yeah, no, I agree with you to a certain extent that a lot of these guys also seem to, the interesting part is back to the question of AI. I was actually complaining on LinkedIn that the last few months, my LinkedIn feed has been filled with AI stuff.
Yep.
That's it, right? And the
Yep.
only other thing I see besides AI is companies either looking for funding or just have raised funding, one of those
Yep.
two things.
Yep.
So either I'm in a bubble, which I am. I completely understand. My social bubble seems to, even though I have 27,000 followers on LinkedIn, I follow quite a few people as well. So it obviously seems like I'm in some kind of a bubble to only get AI. So I checked. It turns out that 30% of my connections are from the Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area, but their position in my feed is nearly 70-80% because they're the ones that get liked. So someone
Yeah. Yeah.
posts
Yeah.
AI, they get 1,000 likes, that's what shows up.
Yeah.
So although it's only 30% of my connections, it's 70% of my feed. So is this a problem with the feed algorithm? Is this a problem with how we are or what we do in LinkedIn? What do you think it is a problem? What is it an indicative problem of? Or is
I
there
just
even
think
a problem?
I don't think it's a problem. I think it's Pareto's law, right? 20% drives 80%, right, of anything, right? So 20% of lawyers make 80% of the income. It's the same thing, right? It's a power law, right? If we know that in VC, one in 10, 1 in 20 investments drive all the returns. And so it's no different, right? Like, one post or influencers, right? Like there's a very small set of influencers that sort of like kind of have broader range of sort of like of ownership of audiences and stuff. So that's just kind of natural, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that is right to a certain extent as well. I feel as if the same thing happens on Twitter. Some days I'll say good morning. I'll get 100 people saying, "Hey, how are you?
Yeah,
Good
yeah,
morning."
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And some days I'll write an insightful post about how macro PE funds that are doing specific takeouts of slow growth companies and crickets.
yeah.
It's like, okay, either the algorithm doesn't work or maybe it doesn't ring with the audience, and it also depends on timing to a certain extent, right? Some people are just at that moment in time. If you're that, let me ask you the last question just before we wrap up.
Yeah.
If you are a millennial or a Gen X and you're at work right now, you have more than 10 years, let's say make that example, you have
Yeah, sure,
more
sure,
than 10 years at work,
sure.
right? You still have more than 10 years to work as a career. um, what would be the things that you would do and explore to try and set yourself up for the right things in the career for the next 5 to 10 years, given that AI is going to play a significant part in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, really learning. So I think like I don't think you need to learn programming. I think you need to understand sort of the basics of like low code, no code, play around with tools, get a Shopify app, like just like understand these type of things, understand the technology. So I actually think like it goes, I give this advice to everyone where it's just like I think if you learn the basics of like online marketing, copywriting, and sales, you'll always be valuable for yourself or for some company in general. But I also think it's sort of like learn to play around with all the technology and tools out there because you have no idea whether it's for a side hustle. I can tell you one of the things I'm super excited about are just sort of I wish, I was like 22 years old now because I'm just like, wow, well, like all the opportunities are available now, right? Like all the tools, like all the borrowed media you can use, like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, like just like all these channels, Instagram, like you can reach people from, Apple App Store, like the things you can build now that reach like hundreds of millions of people is unbelievable. But I think you need to understand the tools that are creating these things, right?
Yeah.
So like I said, and I think it's sort of like front facing, which is like sales, marketing, copywriting. That's really, really cool. Human psychology. And then the other part, like if you learn that, basics of project management, play around with a lot of the emerging tool sets out there, even like ChatGPT, play around with it, right? Like understanding how to prompt AI to find things. AI is not going to be this sort of like this, sort of all knowing, all seeing, know exactly what you're thinking, exactly what you want. That's where we hope the world goes, but I don't think that's going to happen. It's about prompting, right? Of just like the right sort of like terms that you're the right questions to ask. I do think that becomes very important.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Maureen.